Hello and welcome to my knitting shop. I think you're here for a pair of custom socks, am I right? Good, I'm so happy you're here. Let's get started right away. We are going to go through everything that you need to decide everything with your sock. But before we begin, I'll start by explaining the different parts of the sock, and this will help you when we're discussing the other parts later. So, a sock is not just a sock. No. A sock is something that can be very comforting, especially if your feet get cold easily. And they can really just give you that extra cozy feel if you're not feeling your best. So that is why picking your perfect sock and making sure that it fits your feet perfectly is of the essence. Let's start. Every sock has the rib at the top. The rib is always a stretchy part of the fabric of the sock, and it needs to be stretchy so that it can comfortably hug your calf or your ankle, depending on the length of your sock, and it makes sure that the sock does not slide down whilst you're wearing it. And then we have the length of the leg, and this is usually, of course, depending on the length again, a big part of the sock where you can have creative freedom with the visual of your sock. So color or pattern, things like that we'll get into later. This is a big part of the sock that you can design freely. The heel is the most structurally complicated part of the sock, and depending on the measurements from your foot, I will decide the construction method that I will use when designing your sock. So you can choose the design elements, but I will decide the fit for the heel, just to make sure that it fits your foot perfectly. Next we have the foot, both the sole of your foot and the top. And the construction of the sole can also vary depending on, if you have a flat foot or if you have an arch. And we will see to that when I'm doing the measurements. And finally, we have the toe. And this is a small part of the sock, but also very important to make sure that it fits comfortably. Nothing can annoy you more than when a pair of socks are not comfortable by the toe, that they're too snug or too loose. So we will make sure that that doesn't happen. Let's start by talking about yarn. So a sock is of course not just the construction, but it's the selection of the different parts. When we talk about the weight of your yarn, it means the thickness of the yarn, the size of the yarn itself. And there are a big difference in the different weights. Let me show you. First, you of course, have the thinnest yarn weights. The lace weight that you can see is very, very thin, delicate. And the next weight after that is the light fingering weight. It's a little thicker, but still very delicate. After that we have the fingering weight, what is also sometimes commonly called sock yarn, which might tell you which is the most important when making socks, but we'll get to that in a minute. And then we have the sport weight. Now we're getting into a bit of a thicker yarn, but quite commonly also maybe used in socks. These are the thinnest 4 yarn weights, and now I will show you the 4 thickest ones. The DK weight, and the worsted weight. And finally, the Aran weight and the chunky yarn, the chunky weight. This is not uncommon in socks, but if you choose a sock of this weight, it will be a very different feel and aesthetic and perhaps purpose for your sock than if you choose a thinner yarn. We'll talk more about weight, but first let's talk about fibers. When you think of yarn, you're probably thinking about wool, which is of course a very common fiber. This is a wool, 100% Shetland wool. And 100% wool is quite, it usually has a rustic feel. Some people think it's a bit scratchy, but usually that depends on where you're wearing the fabric. So a 100% wool sweater that's a little scratchy probably won't bother you as much, since it will be worn over clothes already. But maybe 100% wool directly on your feet that are quite sensitive already will be a bit much. But a pair of socks worn over another pair of socks and 100% wool might be perfect. Wool is great at keeping heat in, but letting moisture out. So it will help not make you feel trap moisture in, so that you'll get sweaty while wearing it. I think each fiber, I want you to get a feel on your skin. So we will try it both on your arm and also your face, so that you can really get a detailed run through of the fibers. So give me your arm. Okay. And your cheek. Okay, that's the wool. Now This is a merino wool, so it's also wool, but the merino fiber is softer. Usually merino fibers are used for, well, anyone who doesn't like the scratchiness of wool, but especially maybe children who still need wool clothing to stay warm but don't enjoy the scratchiness. Let's try this on your arm too. Lovely. And your cheek. How does that feel? Okay, let's show you this. Fibers can get very expensive and very specific. This is a cashmere, goat cashmere. So this is very, very soft, but of course very expensive. So if you choose this fiber, it's always a luxurious feeling. So let's take this on your arm and your cheek. We have 3 more fibers to go through. This is a wool blend. If you like 2 different kinds of fibers, there's usually a mix for them that we can go over when you have decided. And this is a wool yarn, but 10% silk, which of course makes it very soft as well. So it takes a bit of the scratchiness from the wool out of it. Let's try it. Your cheek here. Lovely. Okay, the last 2. Of course, wool is not the only animal fiber we have, but we also have alpaca. And this is softer than wool, but has a bit of the same qualities that wool has. It keeps heat quite nicely, but also lets out the moisture. But some people think this still has a little bit of that scratchiness left. So let me know what you think. Okay, the final one, the cotton yarn. Now, if we're talking wool, on the other side of the spectrum, I'd put cotton. If we're talking for purpose of the fabric you want to create. If the wool keeps in heat and lets out moisture, the cotton is opposite. The cotton is a great yarn for warm weather, the summertime and the warm autumn days and the spring when the wool is way too warm. So, of course, depending on when you want to wear your sock, cotton can be a good option. So that is something that you'll have to decide when it's time. And the cotton is, of course, not scratchy at all. It's very soft. Okay. Those are the fibers that we have. So we went over yarn weight and fiber. Those are two important decisions, and I think that you should visualize your sock and think of the season that you want to wear the sock. If you want to wear it during the daytime or the nighttime, if you want to wear it out or if you want to wear it at home. And that can really dictate what kind of weight and fiber. Me personally, if I were to give you a suggestion, the merino wool never goes wrong in a sock, I think personally. In a fingering weight, also known as a sock yarn. Usually when I design socks, they want to be worn during colder seasons, when you want to put warm, snuggly socks on your feet. And then the wool is very much needed. But the merino adds that softness for your sensitive feet. But the best part is that a sock yarn usually has a little bit of nylon in it, usually about 25%, like this one. And that is important because if you plan on using your socks walking around your house or maybe running an errand or two, you're putting a lot of stress on your socks when you're wearing them. And the nylon helps them stay intact for longer. So the sock yarn, because it's a thinner yarn, it also creates a denser fabric. And denser fabric plus the nylon really makes the sock last. And if you're thinking of creating your dream socks, then I hope that you're also wanting them to last as long as possible. So my suggestion would be a fingering weight with some nylon and merino wool. But you're of course allowed to pick whatever your heart desires. If you want a big chunky silk sock, you're more than happy to. I will adjust the creating of the sock, the knitting, from the weight that you pick, the yarn that you choose, and the measurements that we'll take later. So now we have gone over the fiber of a yarn and the weight of a yarn, so that you can think about that while we're discussing the next topic, which is the design of the sock. And this is just as complex as you want it to be. There are a lot of different options. You can go from very simple to a very complicated design. And let's start with the color of the yarn, because the color in itself can be the design element that you choose for your sock. That can be enough depending on the look of the sock and the yarn that you choose. Let's look at a simple yarn, a one color yarn. This is probably what everyone thinks of when they're thinking of yarn. Just the color that they want. And I probably don't need to tell you that there are every color imaginable and every tone, pastel, highly saturated or low saturation. Every color can be found and knitted in your sock. If you want to have something a little bit different, there are tonal yarns that are usually a specific color, but there are tones of that color in the yarn. So a slight shift of light and dark can be found in your sock. Next, the color of your sock can be very fun and very look complex, but is actually quite a simple design. This is a self-striping yarn, so that when you knit it, it will look like you have swapped colors throughout the sock, but it's actually the one and the same yarn. So this is a yarn you can choose if you just want stripe after stripe after stripe. And this can be dyed up custom in our shop. If you want a specific range of colors that you can't find in our store, we can dye that up for you if you so choose. There are also a few yarns that we called speckled, and these yarns are hand dyed. The hand dyed yarn have a bit of a unique and some would say maybe a bit chaotic of an appearance sometimes. They're hand dyed, so that means that someone has stood and used their own hands to put in the dye for these skeins. And the hand dyeing itself can be quite subtle, like this one that's mostly white, but there are some speckles of color throughout the sock. Or it can be vibrant and a lot of different colors, which will create a very saturated, colorful sock. And all of these color choices with the different yarns can be enough for the design of the sock. If you just want to showcase the yarn, that's sometimes the best decision. But there are, of course, other ways to go. Now we're going to talk about texture of the sock. And now I'll have to bring out my examples of knitted socks so that I can show you. In this box there are so many different kinds of socks for me to show. I already don't know where to begin. Let's see here. Yes, you can of course, like I said, let the yarn color speak for itself. This sock does not have a lot of texture in the knitting itself. It's a simple sock, but the color is what's being displayed here. Yes, I know what I'm gonna show you. If we're talking about self-striping yarn, I showed you the simple one with the stripes, but they can also be quite complex, like in this sock. This sock is also a self-striping yarn, but it gives the illusion that it's very complicated, that there are many different colors that come in to make the pattern. Take a closer look. And I think these are very nice. There are a lot of different self-striping socks that are just like these, that create this complicated pattern on their own. Let's see. Speaking of stripes, you can of course use different colored yarns to create a pattern that looks like a texture. Let's see, where are you, little sock? Here you are. Like this sock that has many different colors in that the knitter chose themselves, that creates this almost speckled appearance in the stripes, and it looks a bit like it's textured, but it's just color work in the sock. Now I'm going to show you some other examples of texture, but I need to look at those socks. They're over here. So the colors you can use to create those stripes or texture, but you can of course also use color to create a motif. Like this sock creates a pattern, and as you can see, a lizard. As you can imagine, this is endless possibilities for what kind of picture you want to create with your sock. It's really up to your imagination. So those are the textures you can create with the color choice of your yarn. But the stitches themselves can also create actual texture. Let's go over the most common one that you've probably seen on sweaters. A lot of really famous knitted sweaters have something called cables. These are cables. Cables are, just put it simply, where you have the stitches and you cross them. You cross them over each other, and it creates the stitches to travel diagonally across the fabric. And cables can be simple. This is a 1-stitch cable that goes over to create this diamond shape in the sock. A cable can also be complex. Like this sock. Where the cables are multiple and they cross over each other here, and they cross over each other here, and they meet in the middle to create this swirling snake-like effect. And you can combine the cables. You can have simple cables, like this sock has a small cable on this side, 2 actually, and then this more complicated cable at the back. And of course, if you want to go crazy for cables, you can have cables all over and around the sock, crisscrossing over each other, almost like looking like a big knot. That depends what you want. And not only cables create a texture, you can create a different kind of fabric overall using knit stitches and purl stitches. So this stitch pattern creates this, the pattern called it the popcorn stitch, popcorn pattern. So it's almost like little bumps in the fabric. You can see closer. Right there. And the best part is that you can create and combine different textures to create something very unique. Like this sock has both a texture right there to create these lines over the fabric, and it also has cables that go in and out of the texture fabric, as well as a different texture inside the cables. So this creates a very unique, luxurious fabric, I think. So what do you think? You can make a lot of decisions to customize your sock. You can keep the yarn simple, keep the yarn weight bulky, and of course customize the length of the sock. We haven't even discussed, but you can of course do an ankle sock or a regular sock up to your calf, or a knee-high sock. And then you can let the fiber influence the feel of your sock, the aesthetic. And finally, the design element of your sock can be influenced by the color, keeping it simple or letting the color pop, and letting a texture be influenced by the color of the yarn or the stitches themselves. So all of these decisions can vary from simple to complicated, and you can add them together to create your custom design. Deep breath. I know that's a lot that you need to think about. And don't worry, you don't have to decide anything right now. I am going to measure your foot so that I have all the necessary measurements needed to start your socks. And then I want you to go home, sleep on it, think it over, just close your eyes and visualize what you want your sock to be. And then you will let me know what you're thinking, and I will get started right away. Okay, does that sound good? Perfect. I think that we need to measure. So now it's time for you to sit down, and you will put up your feet and I will measure. There are a lot of different measurements needed to make sure that the sock perfectly fits just your feet. And I will have to measure both feet to see if there's any differences, so I can adjust the socks accordingly. How does that sound? Okay, let me get my measuring tape. Okay, let's begin. Okay, I got that around your foot like that, okay. And then the length. Alright, then the toes there. Okay, let me write down some of the measurements. Let's see. Alright, that was it. That was it. Okay. Let me continue. We're still working on that left foot. Okay, maybe that's right. Okay. And all the way around. Okay, let's see right here. Yeah. Okay, I gotta go around like that. Over here, I think, maybe. And okay, that's good. Somewhere here. And around the arch a bit. Okay. Alright. Okay. That's nice. Okay, time to write down the last measurements for the left foot. Yes, I got that. Seems like we got all the measurements for the left one. Now I'm gonna just take a look. I'm gonna have my chart over here and I'll compare the measurements with your right foot. And if there's a difference, I will write it down. there's usually some difference in the feet, which is normally fine if you're just wearing your regular sock, but for these custom ones we want to make sure that every millimeter counts. Okay, let's measure. Okay, we start here. Okay, yes. Alright, but maybe. And your foot, okay, there. All the way around. And the width, both here and there. What does that say? Okay, yeah. Alright, I think that's everything. Let me double check one last one. Okay. So there was just one slight difference, and that was in the arch of your foot. Just a 0.3 millimeter difference. Alright. Then we got it. Of course. I am so happy that you noticed. I forgot to show you. There's of course one more color design feature for you to choose. Let's go through those socks. You can have one yarn, of course, for the entire sock, but usually it's quite fun to choose the toe, the heel, or the rib in a different color, and you can mix and match depending on the look. So for instance, this sock has a different colored rib and a different colored toe. This sock has a different colored rib and a different colored heel. And this sock has a different colored toe and a different colored heel. And you can of course choose just one or none and just go with that one yarn look. But this little design feature doesn't need a whole big skein of yarn. Instead, you can choose from one of our mini skeins. And I don't need to tell you that these have just as many color choices as the big skeins. You can go for a full, simple one color, or you can do a tonal, just a slight variation in the color. Or you can do a chaotic one, lots and lots of different colors. And of course, just for fun, you can have glittered yarn. If that strikes your fancy, we have glitter in these big skeins as well, of course. So these you can also look at before you go. Okay, let's make sure we've gone over everything. We've talked about the design elements of your sock so that you know each part that you need to make decisions about. The rib, the leg, the heel, the foot, and the toe. And you know the different weights, you know the different fibers, you know the different color choices, you know how the sock design can be made up of color and texture, and how you can mix and match these. And finally, we've taken all your measurements so that I know just how to make your sock fit. That's everything. So now you can go home, relax, and you will let me know what you need in your custom sock. Okay.